You're very welcome. It's great to have you with us. We'd love to take this opportunity of you listening to you, sharing with us maybe what brought you into JPIC and what is involved in your ministry in JPIC.
Sure. Well, great to be with you all and to join you this morning for a little chat. It's providential in some ways that it's 2022, because certainly the inspiration for the work that I've been engaged in here in one form or another for the last 50 years was the Oblate General Chapter of 1972. And probably some of you sitting here who remember it better than I do. But it came up with those three documents that were that funny color on them. You know, they were orange, at least the ones we got. But the one in there that really caught us in my area was Missionary Outlook. 1972, 50 years ago, we had survived the 60s, but we were only learning to get over the impact. This was the 60s, as we know, were a crazy decade, nearly everywhere around the world. It was revolution and liberation of all kinds. And so also in the church, because we were also adjusting to the council. And the congregation was adjusting to what the council had asked religious congregations to do in terms of renewal. And, you know, we wrote some new constitution and rules, then came back and brought all these folks from all over the world to the chapter and asked them to talk about the reality in where they're working. And asked about what should be a missionary response to the reality that they were experiencing, whether it was in Africa, whether it was in Latin America, Asia, Europe, North America, and how would you talk about that? And so that's why the document for me was really powerful. Very small document, doesn't take you long to read it. But the two things that stood out in terms of the upheaval in the world, which is very similar to something that's going on today that I'll mention, is how does the church, how do the Oblates, how do we wrestle with these very, very complicated issues? And two things came clear: that the Oblates should continue to accompany the marginalized and the poor. And accompany means walking with, which goes a little bit with the theme of the synodality question, right? Talking and walking with the people, and which I think we've done very well. The second piece said that we should be present where decisions that impact the lives and the future of the poor are made. So twofold: accompany the poor in their daily journey, whether it's providing shelter, providing food, advice, education, you name it, and it could be families, could be children, could be sailors at sea, could be people in jail, you name any of that, and we've embraced that. The second one, we tried to figure out how are you present where decisions affecting the lives and the future of the poor are made. Look, fast forward. We're approaching 10 billion people in the world today. We're at right about 8.5. That's a long way from where we were in 1960 in terms of numbers. The population is going to continue to grow, they suggest, to about 12. So that's almost doubled in a century. And the reality is that's a lot of people to accompany. Second piece of that is we've got this global system where the 215 countries of the world and their leaders try to figure out how do we work together without killing each other. How do we agree on certain things, agree to disagree on other things? And is there some wisdom from the church, from the scripture, from the Holy Spirit that can help us in making those decisions? So anyway, fast forward, through the 80s, the 90s, we looked at different ways in which we might figure out how the Oblates could penetrate those kinds of places. And done it relatively well. We've got a person at the UN We're working with VIVAT and about 14 other congregations. So we have some people in New York, we have some people in Geneva, we have some people in Nairobi, all are big centers for the United Nations. We have our office in Washington, D.C., which focuses very much on the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government, on the World Bank, which is headquartered in Washington, on the IMF, and so that's very much in the financial side. So those are the organizations where the leaders of the world come together, usually twice a year, but more importantly, once a year, and they set policy. They look around and kind of like a general chapter, but ours are every 6 years, and say, what's changed since last year? What needs fine-tuning? What needs to be adjusted? And we have an opportunity as religious, working with other religious and working with other religions, to be present at those meetings. So the United Nations system, and I won't bore you with this, is set up so that it is for governments. But they want civil society around in the second ring of the circle. If you look at the Security Council, you see them there. Well, just add a few more circles. You're not in the center, but you are on the periphery, able to talk to the people who are at the center. And that's the way in which it works. Probably happens the same way down here in Dáil Éireann, right? You see the main actors are there in the Dáil debating the issue, but I can guarantee you there are a lot of people out in the hallway whispering in their ear before they go in there, just to make sure that their point is made. So it works in that way. So, second large point is that probably in the middle of the 1980s, we became aware that there were a number of major actors in the global system. Obviously, governments. And we all know about governments. You have elections and one party's in power and they get to run the operation for a while. In lots of countries, and particularly in the developing world, you have extraordinary powerful militaries. And that's true of the United States, it's true of Brazil, it's true of China, it's true of the power of the military in Indonesia. I see Des sitting over there. The power of the military institutions in countries is immense. But in the 80s, our focus also became on companies. So who else decides what happens in the world these days? Besides governments, besides military, besides very bright academics who are studying and writing papers and getting exposed on television, it's the companies. They're huge. Whether it's Coca-Cola, whether it's McDonald's, whether it's Apple, Microsoft, you name it. They have enormous wealth, much more money than governments do. They have a presence. I think the last time we talked to Coca-Cola, they said they're in 115 countries around the world. 115. And you know, you tell that it's Coca-Cola, what? Their sign has never changed. It's always red. It's always in the classical Coca-Cola. And the only thing they don't change is the formula for the Coca-Cola. And you can never find out what it is. So two things at headquarters in Atlanta. Advertising, they control. If you're going to have a franchise, it's got to have that trademark on there somewhere. And you can't change the formula for the Coca-Cola. You can make a Diet Coke or you make it 2% or whatever, but the core ingredient is the secret that, you know, some say they've addicted half the world to it. I'm not sure if I'll go that far, but there are certain people who can't get through the day without a can of Coke or a bottle of Coke. And you could say that about many other corporations. So you look at this from the Morning Irish Times, and I flip to page 2 in here. Who are the top 10 companies? Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook. Right? Most of us never heard of these companies 20 years ago. Might have begun to hear about them 10 years ago. Imagine. And now they're now the top 4. And then after that, people who make medical devices, because many of us are getting older and we need all sorts of medical devices or aids to keep us churning, and electronics companies. So nobody here is making anything, is what I want to point out. These are not the people who are building railroads or making cars or making buses. They're in the brainstem, they're in the electronics business, they're in the communications business. They're helping the rest of us to communicate with the other nearly 10 billion people out there. Software, hardware, you name it. And so, short circuit, we said, is there a way that we can influence these companies in their policies, their practices, their products, and their services? And the way that we decided and we learned how to do that was to say, as a congregation, as most religious congregations, as most dioceses, as most religions, we do have funds. And, 50 years ago, most of those funds you were putting in the local credit union, or you were putting in the local bank, right? Because that's the way in which you were able to make a little interest and to pay off your bills at the end of the year. And so we trusted bankers, or we trusted credit unions, because rather than just letting the money sit in the pastor's drawer and not gain any value, you at least got 2% or 3%. And now all of a sudden came along the opportunity to invest in the stock market, and you could be in a good year up around 7, 8, or 9%. That gave you more money to run a better school, to do more, take better care of missionaries, take better care of the travel budget that you have. So we took a look around and said, who do the Oblates have investments, the Oblate provinces? What shares do we own? And so we took a map of that and just got some information from different provinces at the time, and decided to use, because I think the important ingredient here is if you own a share of a company, you're a part owner. You're not the complete owner, but you're a part owner. And as we know from theology and philosophy, ownership brings responsibility. It's not just there because it's nice to have. Because you own a house, you have some responsibility to take care of it, to be a part of the community. So we decided to say, well, let's figure out how we use that position to engage the leaders of corporations. And that's a good amount of what we do now, made much easier by the creation of the OIP, the Oblate Investment Pastoral Trust, which was created in 1992. You may remember Father Alphonse Coiter was the general treasurer at the time, and he was looking around at all the units of the congregation and saying, how can we help them to manage their finances better, more safely, more securely, and be able to gain some interest or some increase the value so that they have more money to do their mission, whether it's to buy a Jeep, to build a house, to fix a door, you name it. But that was his insight, and he had the help of a number of other oblates to do that, so that today it's a substantial fund built up over these 30 years and has many Oblate units who are members. Most of the ones that I know are. They have some investments there. But we also have investments from about 25% of the fund is from other religious congregations, and it's from other small dioceses that may have been founded by Oblates. For instance, many of the dioceses in Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka have money in the OIP. So that's a service to places in the church that might not have access to this kind of money management and care and safety, right? So there you go. So my work these days is in both of those fields. Spend a lot of time in Washington trying to influence legislation, trying to go to the World Bank meetings or the IMF meetings. For instance, the IMF just had their meeting, and two countries where Oblates are very active are in very bad trouble these days because of debt. Sri Lanka, which is an historic mission for the congregation, and Zambia. We're all familiar with foreign debt because it's been around forever. People overborrow, countries overborrow, and then they're not able to pay back. The unique feature about the trouble that Sri Lanka and Zambia are in is this big player has entered from the side called China. So China owns a number of the bonds of Sri Lanka and a number of the bonds of Zambia and numerous other countries, but those are the two that are front and center. So we will be trying to influence the committees at those two, the committees that have been formed to try and resolve the debt issue for those two countries. And you know that countries' debt hugely impacts the budget. Most countries are unable to borrow. If you're already in debt, nobody's going to lend you money. So if they go out to the capital markets, whether it's Brazil, whether it's Zambia, Sri Lanka, Tanzania, any place, if they lend you money, what are they going to do? They're going to want a bigger payback. It's a bigger risk, higher interest. So it's going to cost the country, and eventually that impacts the lives of the poor at the local level, because the government has less money to spend on health, education, transportation, price of fuel, price of rice, you name it. So that's an example of one of the pieces. The second one, in terms of what I spend time doing and people in our office do, is we engage with corporations. And hallelujah, thanks be to God for that, for the internet and for those little mobile phones we carry around. Because I can tell you, 25 years ago, we have shares in about 800 companies. So you do the math. 800 annual meetings. There's absolutely no way you can get to all those meetings. Particularly if you have to get a train, you have to get a plane, you have to travel to the venue, you have to show your credentials, you have to prepare beforehand, you have to say, I want to ask a question, or I want to, give a little presentation. And the presentations would only be 2 or 3 minutes. Because of COVID and because of all those electronic companies I talked about a few minutes ago, all of those meetings, in a flash, they all went virtual. Right? They're all on Zoom. They're all on WebEx, whatever medium they use. So I could technically get up in the morning, roll out of bed, right, get in front of my computer, and in the course of a day, I could participate in at least 5 or 6 of those meetings. That would have been physically impossible previously. And it's controlled. It's not every Tom, Dick, and Harry or Mary and Jane that can jump on there. They give you a password. They give you a code, and that allows you to enter because you are a shareholder. And we will ask different sets of questions from different companies. We've had great success this year. We're very happy with Amazon, with looking for great success at Google and Alphabet. Very obscure issue, so I won't go deep into this. We think that by all of this placement and of their headquarters and of their companies, and Dublin is an example of this, they've avoided paying taxes, or at least paying their fair share of taxes, to the countries where they make a profit or where they sell their products. And the Irish government, as you know, for so long has had one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the world. Hence, all those buildings that you pass when you're coming in from the airport, it's an ideal place for you to locate your business. So that's all changed now, right, with the recent legislation from the European Union. And so now there is a level of harmonization in terms of taxes. So we want these companies to be more transparent, tell us how much taxes they're paying in any country that they're operating. I don't care if it's Kenya, if it's the Congo, or if it's Paraguay, which they won't always do. They tell you, well, that's business and you wouldn't understand it, so we're very busy doing the stuff we're doing. So anyway, we had a big victory with those companies, and we're looking forward to more. That's an example of some of the conversation we have. We may particularly, and I'll close with this, we may talk to a company about the salaries they're paying to their employees. Not to the salaries they're paying to the CEO or the top management, but the people who do the maintenance work in their buildings, the people who prepare the meals, the people, if they're running a factory, the people that are working on the assembly line, whether it's in Vietnam or Cambodia, how much are they getting paid? Are they old enough to be working? right? Are women treated on an equal basis with men? So it's a wide list of questions. What are they doing with any excess chemicals or product that could contaminate the air or the earth? How are they disposing of that? And how are they managing those kinds of relationships with the local communities? Because as you know, a company may come in, get a big splash, said, oh, we just opened a new building and a new facility, we've created 1,000 jobs, and in 10 years they may be gone, right? So the issue is who's supposed to clean up the mess, and what are the workers that they originally hired going? So those are the kind of questions that we will discuss with them, and we will make some suggestions about how they might be more attentive to the needs of their workers and the environment in what they're doing.